For the most part, it's generally safe to say that for those of us who watched SpongeBob SquarePants as young kids, not very many of us resonated with Squidward. A lot of us could relate to the childlike wonder of SpongeBob or the random humor of Patrick, but when it came to Squidward just raining all over everyone's parade, it always felt like he kind of just existed to be a bummer. With that being said though, in hindsight, that couldn't be further from the truth. Squidward exists to literally just be a normal person trying to get through their daily life while the entire world rains on him and there isn't really a single thing he can do other than just tolerate and try to make the best of it. This man is just trying to get through his day at his miserable job so he can go home and at least attempt to enjoy the things in life that spark happiness. All the while, though, he's met with literally everything he does just blowing up in his face, either because of SpongeBob and Patrick, or just because life seems to constantly dump all over him no matter how hard he tries. I honestly don't think Squidward is a miserable jerk by default, and definitely not because he wants to be. I think he's fully fed up with a world that just kind of gets worse and worse, and no matter how hard he tries to be happy, it just leads him back to the start of the same excruciating 11-minute loop that he's been stuck in for longer than he can remember. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far as boldly claiming that most of us who grew up watching this show as kids actually grew up to be adults that resonate with Squidward more than literally any other character in this show. And we're not talking about canned bread or mediocre clarinet playing, we're talking about
Wumbo Wing.
I wonder if a fall from this height would be enough to kill me.
Here lie Squidward's hopes and dreams. What a baby.
Too bad that didn't kill me.
We're talking about an everyday, normal person just trying to find their perfect peaceful life, fighting a losing battle with the world around them, all the while facing incredibly human situations, just hyperbolized to the highest degree. And that's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna deep dive into a few episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants that truly showcase how we all grew up to become Squidward. But before I get into it though, it would really mean a lot to me if we could have a nice community chat down in the comments about your favorite Squidward episodes, quotes, moments, and when you finish the video, any episodes you'd like to see me cover in part 2. It means so much to me that I have such a positive and uplifting community despite a lot of my videos ironically being about morbid topics. You guys are the absolute best, and it would mean a lot to me if right now we could flex those positive muscles and just say something nice to somebody down in the comments. Compliment someone's favorite episode or take a moment to appreciate a funny moment that someone else brought up. The small stuff like that can go a surprisingly far way in brightening someone else's day and putting a smile on their face. With that being said though, thank you so much for being here and for clicking on this video. I hope you have a genuinely amazing day. So to start things out, we're going to check out an episode that when you peel it back might just be one of the most adult episodes of the entire series. It's one that we can all relate to on face value because we've all worked a crummy job at one point. But when we dig into the nuances and the subtle similarities to real life, it's genuinely shocking how this one just becomes more and more relatable. We're diving into none other than Squid on Strike. As this episode starts out, we see Mr. Krabs in his office sitting at his desk and counting his money while singing. His joyful song comes to an abrupt halt, however, when he realizes that profits are down an entire whopping $3 from where they were last month. In a massive panic, he decides that it's time to run a tighter ship, sprinting out to police his employees.
Thank you for choosing the Krusty Krab. Here's your change.
Mr. Squidward!
Wow.
What's with all this change nonsense?
From there, SpongeBob walks up, and when Mr. Krabs witnesses him tying his tie, as well as Squidward literally just taking a breath, he starts scolding them both for goofing off while working. Moments later, he ends up pulling out 2 envelopes, handing one to Squidward, acting as if he's giving them their paychecks.
I can't accept your money, Mr. Krabs. Grilling is my passion.
What is this? You're making me pay you to stand at the cash register?
There's gonna be a few changes around here. Every time I catch you two goofing off, I'm gonna charge you for it.
18, 19, and 20. Here you go, Mr. K. I think this should cover all my nonsense.
Squidward immediately pulls SpongeBob aside, completely dumbfounded that he would just roll over so quickly to Mr. Krabs, demanding money from them. He tells SpongeBob that he won't be paying a penny to Mr. Krabs, suggesting that they both unite together and go on strike so that they can be treated fairly while working at the Krusty Krab. Not realizing what that directly entails and kinda just excited to be included though, SpongeBob happily agrees.
We're going on strike. I still don't know what strike means, but we're going on a strike. Hey, guess what, Mr. Krabs? Me and Squidward are gonna go on strike.
A strike?
Yeah.
You mean you're gonna make picket signs? And you're gonna make protest speeches? And you're gonna demand me respect?
Yeah! No.
At that, we see SpongeBob standing at the door of the Krusty Krab, just bawling his eyes out, upset with Squidward because he didn't tell him that he could be fired over this. Squidward, however, rips SpongeBob off the door, telling him that stuff like this is exactly why they went on strike in the first place. They want to show Mr. Krabs how valuable that they are as employees and that he needs them more than they need him.
We are Workers United!
Sorry.
Just do exactly as I say, SpongeBob, and in no time, you will have your job back and more.
And more?
As the strike begins, Squidward rips his Krusty Krab hat off of his head and stomps it into the ground, saying that they need to rid themselves of the symbols of their oppression. He instructs SpongeBob to do the same, however, SpongeBob struggles, recognizing how much he loves his hat, saying that it's never oppressed him.
SpongeBob, you're pathetic! Look, I threw my head on the ground.
Aha! A confession! Next time, think before you litter.
From there, the strike progresses as Squidward tries to teach SpongeBob how to make picket signs, but yet again, he completely struggles, not really understanding what that term means. Ultimately, they just end up pushing more customers to the Krusty Krab as a result of SpongeBob's sign mishaps, leaving Squidward trampled in the rush. As time passes, we end up seeing SpongeBob standing outside of the Krusty Krab, finally with a decent protest sign, chanting,
Mr. Krabs is in there, standing at the concession, plotting his oppression.
What the heck does that mean?
I don't know. Squidward told me to yell it at people.
Then you must be SpongeBob SquarePants!
Yes?
Dude, you are like a fry cook legend! Will you sign my spatula?
While SpongeBob signs the spatula, the kid explains that he's here to take his job, leaving SpongeBob completely heartbroken and Squidward pissed off at SpongeBob for letting scabs cross the picket line without so much as a minor threat. As the dominoes fall, Squidward becomes fed up with SpongeBob's sorry excuse for striking, and he tasks him with just hiding behind a pole nearby while Squidward takes the wheel.
We will dismantle oppression board by board. We'll saw the foundation of pig business in half, even if it takes an eternity.
Gee, I don't know what Squidward's talking about, but he sure sounds convincing.
With your support, we will send the hammer of the people's will crashing through the windows of Mr. Krabs' House of Servitude.
The whole crowd, completely stoked on Squidward's cause, ends up getting hungry after giving so much support, So they all run to the Krusty Krab to get a Krabby Patty, yet again trampling Squidward in the process.
Nobody gives a care about the fate of labor as long as they can get their instant gratification.
That was a great speech, Squidward. You practically had them eating out of your hands.
But they didn't, did they, Mr. Squidward? Because they were too busy eating out of mine.
Mr. Krabs ends up roasting their strike further, telling them that they're doing nothing but driving up business and helping him out. SpongeBob tries to argue with him, doing his best to replicate Squidward's speech. However, he fails miserably, just kind of boring Mr. Krabs in the process, causing him to turn and head back inside mid-SpongeBob speaking.
And me and Squidward are gonna stay on strike, even if it takes forever! 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 Forever!
Forever?
Hey, Squidward, I bet old man Krabs is gonna break any day. Squidward, Squidward.
In a panic, Squidward jumps out of bed saying that he needs to fix things with Mr. Krabs, but as soon as he gets to his front door, Mr. Krabs is standing there planning on how he's gonna talk to Squidward about coming back to work. He cries his eyes out and begs, saying that he's ruined without him and SpongeBob, and that the teenagers he hired are ruining his restaurant. As he grovels at Squidward's feet, he says that he's prepared to do whatever it takes for them to come back to work for him.
Your story breaks my heart, Mr. Krabs. Why don't we take a little walk and discuss my terms?
I got a bad feeling in the pit of me wallet.
As that's happening, we cut to SpongeBob's house where we see him laying in bed thinking about how Squidward's words are buzzing in his head like an angry jellyfish. At that, he decides that it's time for some action, busting out of his front door ready to raise some hell. He sneaks over to the Krusty Krab in the wee hours of the morning and destroys the entire restaurant using Squidward's speech as inspiration.
I will dismantle this oppressive establishment board by board. I will saw the tables of tyranny in half. Gnaw at the ankles of big business. Squidward will be so proud.
As the morning comes around, Squidward and Mr. Krabs are on their way to the Krusty Krab, having wrapped up their negotiations. Mr. Krabs says he's excited to fire the teenagers and get back to business as usual, closing his eyes and going on autopilot as he walks right into his destroyed restaurant. Squidward, though, who still has his eyes open with no reason to go on autopilot like Mr. Krabs is, starts to panic, running up to SpongeBob, who's hiding nearby, excitedly thinking that they're gonna get their jobs back due to him dismantling this oppressive establishment.
Squidward! SpongeBob! In order to pay off these damages, you two are gonna work for me forever!
Yahoo! The strike worked, Squidward. We got our jobs back forever.
One eternity later.
Now, the number of ways that this episode fully embodies the point of this video is almost offensive. There are just a ridiculous number of examples to point out here, but the one thing to keep in mind here at the forefront of everything is the fact that this is all because profits at this business were down a mere $3. Of course, on its face, especially as a kid, this is something you see and by default just kind of attribute to Mr. Krabs being greedy and nothing further than that. That's the easy conclusion and it just kind of makes sense. But behind that easy conclusion lies a very real and relatable point that is so prevalent in 2025 society. That would be the greediness of massive corporations and the executives running them who feel like it's necessary to tighten the chain that they already have very secure on their workers in the name of saving money. when profits are only down like 0.03%. This is the kind of thing that a majority of us who've been in the workforce for a long time have experienced multiple times over. You know, someone high up in the corporate pyramid who decides that in the name of making up that decimal percentage, the entire corporation is going to implement changes that result in both the employees and the customers being miserable. The biggest thing that really emphasized this is how right out the gate, Mr. Krabs immediately starts reprimanding Squidward for giving a customer their change after they pay for their food. A policy like refusing to give change and just keeping people's money is obviously illegal and wouldn't ever fly, but like it's symbolic of actual corner-cutting changes where the employee has to tell a customer no on the basis of a new grimy policy that's completely out of the employee's hands. It opens up the door for routine situations where the employee repeatedly has to take the brunt of a customer's dissatisfaction, which has a tendency to spill over into full-blown rage at the employee who, again, has no control over any of this. All the while, the boss, in this case Mr. Krabs, gets to sit high and mighty, safe from confrontation in his office, sleeping well at night knowing that he'll make that $3 back at the expense of literally everybody else around him. Even outside of that too, we have to consider the fact that Squidward in this moment was just minding his own business and doing his job. He was making change like he's supposed to, and out of nowhere Mr. Krabs comes up and decides to berate him for literally doing what he's supposed to be doing. This, yet again, oh man, we've all been here. We've all had that manager who just polices everything you do, even when you're doing it correctly, and like not even consistently policing either. In that regard, every aspect of this episode highlights the lives of overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated employees. Furthermore, this episode is extremely relatable to anyone who's ever felt trapped in a dead-end job. But even deeper than that point is how it exemplifies the deep inner fear of getting old and being stuck in the same exact spot that you've always been in. Of course, that comes in the form of Squidward growing older and dying next to SpongeBob multiple times in this episode. Sure, the first time it may have been in fear of their strike never getting resolved, but in the end, it was in the context of Squidward and SpongeBob needing to pay back the destruction caused. And that right there just kind of boldened the sentiment that this genuinely is a fear that Squidward holds on to very deeply. He's absolutely terrified that he might spend the rest of his life in the same exact place that he has always been in, which in and of itself is a very human fear. The most relatable part, though, is the dread in considering that he could be put into that position without it ever being within his control. That's the real overlooked aspect here that, especially in this day and age, rings true and haunts a lot of us to our core. Instead of that ball and chain keeping you there for the rest of your life, being a debt repaid for destruction, though, in the case of a lot of Americans, it's a rapidly rising cost of living, combined with pay that doesn't really scale properly to accommodate for that rise very well. Specifically, the ball and chain, though, comes in the form of higher paying jobs not existing because a majority of the job listings online are ghost listings for jobs that aren't actually hiring. So you, as the worker, just stay where you've always been and settle, because your bills aren't going to pay themselves, and every job that you apply to mysteriously gets met with an automated reply seconds later telling you that you didn't get the job. No explanation why, of course. As it pertains to Bikini Bottom, it's interesting to realize that Squidward's subconscious panicking and imagining the scenario of him living the last of his days in the same exact rut that he's in now is essentially a confirmation that he sees through all of the nonsense. He recognizes the system that he's stuck in, he recognizes that it's not going anywhere, and he recognizes that there isn't a single thing that he can do about it. So he just continues on, apathetic and miserable, trying his best but still getting scolded by Mr. Krabs despite everything. On that note, this episode also really highlights the stark contrast between a new employee and a tenured employee. SpongeBob wholeheartedly represents the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed employee who's just kind of happy to be there, still wearing the rose-colored heart-shaped glasses that he was issued at orientation, just ready to take whatever the boss dishes out. He doesn't see any of this as miserable. He just loves flipping burgers and paying Mr. Krabs to do it instead of actually being paid and, having a savings. Meanwhile, Squidward is a classic representation of the tenured, burnt-out employee who has seen the boss's true colors too many times, and now they're able to see right through the entire facade, understanding that the workplace isn't all sunshine and rainbows like they want you to believe. Ultimately, though, it goes without saying that tenure isn't the deciding factor here, of course. You can be new at a job and still see through the nonsense, or, on the other hand, be tenured and still have extremely positive feelings about your job and workplace. There's no blanket statements that can encompass all of this, as every employee and employer is different, and opinions definitely subjective. But without a doubt, that doesn't change the fact that in this scenario, SpongeBob absolutely represents the happy to grind mentality, while Squidward is the embodiment of exhaustion and cynicism. Going in just a bit of a different direction, this episode is one that's truly relatable to anyone who's ever tried to stand up for themselves and others, especially in the context of unions and strikes specifically. In this episode, the context is Squidward obviously taking a stand against unfair labor practices and getting SpongeBob to rally behind him. Once that happens though, Mr. Krabs immediately laughs it off, not waiting a second to replace them. Of course, this highlights exactly how expendable Mr. Krabs sees his employees, which is all too realistic of employers in general. But it's also a very painful and real portrayal of how corporations tend to treat labor movements. They often don't take this kind of thing seriously, forsaking the fact that the people they're wronging and proceeding to shrug off are literally their bottom line. Outside of how massive corporate entities react though, this is also reflective of how some people outside of that profession view unions and strikes in general. A surprising amount of people often dismiss strikes and see them as pointless whining just because they themselves don't understand the struggle or have ever experienced it. But you're gonna tell me that if your employer was charging you to just exist in their building, you wouldn't be a little upset? And if you went to find a new job after applying to more than 50 and not hearing anything back, you would just sit back and pay your employer and not stand up for yourself? Specifically being charged for breathing in their building? Obviously, this episode of SpongeBob is a hyperbolized caricature of this kind of situation, but that doesn't make the point any less valid. Workers deserve to be treated fairly and with respect, period. With all of that being said though, this episode also serves as a shocking representation of how futile that leadership and standing together is when no one gets it. When people don't realize why they're doing what they're doing and just kind of blindly support the cause, you can't expect a change for the better that's long-lasting. In the case of this episode, this kind of serves to be the salt in the wound. Squidward finally stands up and tries to lead, actually caring about something bigger than himself and his best interest for once. Ultimately though, it would be SpongeBob's naive but well-meaning nature that would absolutely undermine Squidward's entire goal unintentionally. Squidward sought out to make things better and to implement changes that would benefit him, SpongeBob, and any future employees. However, SpongeBob taking things literally would end up leaving the entire restaurant in rubble and essentially having them forced to do the exact thing that Squidward was standing up against. Keep in mind, this all reached its boiling point when Mr. Krabs wanted them to pay him to work there. That's the moment where Squidward decided to stand up to him. But in the long run, he would end up having to pay back Mr. Krabs more than ever. This right here is just so painfully real to anyone who's ever tried to take charge or stand up for something only to have the entire cause completely derailed and misconstrued by people who just kind of don't understand the nuance. And even bigger than that, this entire episode as a whole can serve as a metaphor for how good causes can get sabotaged when the movement isn't properly understood and its people aren't all fully on the same page. Considering the episode as a whole, possibly the most relatable of all though would be just the crushing pointlessness of everything. At the end of the trail here, Squidward just ends up worse off than he was before, and his entire effort ends up being completely meaningless. That right there truly is such a painful lesson in adulthood and leadership. The struggle of coming to the realization that your grand cause that you made a big stand for ended with absolutely no progress. Not only because the powers in charge never took any of this seriously, but also because the entire cause imploded on itself due to the workers not being as united as they needed to be, and clear on their ultimate goal and confident that they're both pursuing the same outcome. It genuinely is an unhealthy mix of funny and tragic when you look at it that way. It's one of those that, when you watched it as a kid, you never would have imagined that someday this would be a reminder of how hard it is to simply exist in a predatory system that feels rock solid and unbreakable. To be honest though, I'm not sure what's more heartbreaking. That fact, or the fact that this one is such a major example of the price of resistance. Standing up for what you believe in isn't easy, and of course, it doesn't come without consequence a lot of times. In this case, we saw Squidward lose a lot for simply standing up for him and SpongeBob. He lost his job, any shred of respect that Mr. Krabs had for him, and a lot of his dignity in being forced to unite with SpongeBob. All simply for standing up and pointing out something that was unfair. Of course, it goes without saying that this is 100% indicative of how the system has a tendency to punish you for trying. It doesn't matter how many laws are implemented or unions are formed, corporations will always find a way to punish those who attempt to stand up to their mistreatment. Now, I am no expert on laws as it pertains to Bikini Bottom or even the United States for that matter. But according to a quick Google search, participants in legal strikes are protected under the National Labor Relations Act. A company can't just fire employees simply for striking, and of course there are certain exceptions as well as requirements that need to be met to be safe under that protective blanket, but even with that being said, I can't help but wonder if SpongeBob and Squidward may have had a solid legal case to sue Mr. Krabs for the fact that he fired them literally just because they were going to go on strike. They hadn't even started it yet. I'm not sure if their situation would check the correct boxes to be protected, but I guess that's kind of beside my real, bigger point to be made here. It needs to be said that it isn't surprising for a single second that a boss like Mr. Krabs wouldn't even consider the legality of firing them before just doing it right there on the spot. He's such an emotionally fueled decision maker, especially when the emotion in question is anger. He's genuinely a piece of garbage, boss, and the fact that he would fire them like that really isn't surprising for even a moment. And I think that makes the situation so much more relatable as well. The fact that you can kinda see a lot of this coming from a mile away absolutely lends to the fact that it's relatable due to real life experience. You can see it coming from so far away because it's not only a tale as old as time, It's a tale that a lot of everyday people, including maybe even you, the person watching this video, have lived through in one form or another. If there were anything else that I want to bring up as it pertains to this episode before we move on to the next one, it would be that moment where Squidward throws his hat on the ground in protest just to get a littering ticket as he's doing it. Now, this one isn't necessarily the most relatable in its direct content, but the sentiment behind it absolutely is. This, in every sense, was the world just dumping all over Squidward regardless of his intentions being noble or not. That's one huge continuous theme that we're gonna see throughout this episode. The fact that whether or not Squidward is acting in good faith, bad things just tend to happen to him because he just so happens to always be in the right place at the right time for life to remind him that it hates him. It's like when you're running late for work or school and you end up getting pulled over for speeding and given a ticket by the one single highway patrol trooper in a 30-mile radius. Like, of course it's a law broken and speeding isn't good, but at that moment, it's not like you wanted to be speeding. This isn't a drag race for fun, it's out of stress and a real life worry. As a result, in the moment that it's happening, it just kind of feels like the final nail in the coffin when you have so much on your plate. But like, you did what you did, so literally all you can do is take your spanking and continue on your way, hoping for a slightly better day. On a more broad note, if you can't relate to getting a speeding ticket or whatever, it's the general sentiment of when it rains, it pours. The moment with Squidward being given a ticket over his hat while he's already been fired for standing up to mistreatment genuinely is the purest embodiment of feeling like the higher powers have it out for Squidward, and we've all had those kind of rough days for sure. Moving along though, after accepting the struggles of a dead-end job under a carelessly greedy boss and the fact that you can't do anything about it, what do? Well, you cope with life. You do whatever you can to find a bit of good feelings and positivity in a world that just constantly feels like a giant cloud of fog blinding your long-distance sight. All you can do is focus on what's directly in front of you because that's all you can seem to even see. But what happens when that pursuit of good feelings as a coping mechanism turns toxic? When we start comparing ourselves to others, feeling like the source of our good feelings isn't as strong as theirs. This, of course, would be yet another really human example that we surprisingly learned through Squidward in an episode that, for a lot of people, does hit close to home. We're talking about the Season 3 episode, Squilliam Returns. As this episode begins, we see Squidward standing at the cash register in the Krusty Krab, staring at his watch and counting the final 10 seconds until he's done with his shift, while SpongeBob mops the floor nearby.
I'm done with my shift, Mr. Krabs. And let me just say, there will come a day when I will make something of my life, and I will never have to set foot in this grease trap again!
Yeah, we'll see you after your lunch break, Squidward.
Okay.
As Squidward walks out of the Krusty Krab, he overhears his arch-rival from high school, Squilliam Fancy Son, walking down the street with his entourage, talking about his private island, and how the only way off is to take his private yacht across his private lake to his private heliport. Squidward starts to panic at the thought of Squilliam seeing him in his Krusty Krab uniform, so he goes to throw it in the trash. But sadly for him, it's a little too late.
On your lunch break, Squiddy? Yes, hey, what you been up to?
Oh, just succeeding in everything you failed in.
You are no great shake, Squilliam Fancy Son. Anyone can be a big shot in a hick town like Bikini Bottom.
Oh, is that so? Let's hear what you've accomplished since high school, Squiddy.
As Squidward stands there sweating buckets with everybody clowning on him and joking about him being a cashier, he ends up spitting out a blatant lie, telling Squilliam that he owns a 5-star restaurant.
I had no idea you were such a success.
That's right.
And I would be honored if you would allow me to come to your restaurant tonight.
Tonight?
In fact, we'll all come. My treat!
Back inside the Krusty Krab, Squidward sits in Mr. Krabs' office in tears, telling him all about the situation. Similarly to how he responded to the labor complaints, Mr. Krabs is pretty quick to brush it off, playing Squidward a sad song on the world's smallest violin. He shoots down Squidward's request to run the restaurant for a night. That is, until he hears that Squilliam Fancy Son, the big shot rich guy, is the high school rival in question.
Squilliam? That guy who made millions doing what you wish you could do?
Don't rub it in.
Why didn't you tell me? We'll take him to the cleaners.
All right, listen up. Men, Squilliam Fancy Son will be here in 20 minutes. Therefore, we need to turn the Krusty Krab into a fancy restaurant as soon as possible. Patrick, what are you doing here?
I thought the car would help me straighten out my life, sir.
Squidward ends up accepting Patrick's help, needing all the hands that he can get. At that, he appoints him to be the doorman, offering to take customers' hats on the way in. Considering that Mr. Krabs served on the SS Gourmet, Squidward ends up appointing him the head chef.
What can I do?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but SpongeBob, you're going to have to be the waiter.
What's that?
It's the guy who goes to tables and takes orders.
Do other restaurants do that?
Yes, they do that. Now listen, Squilliam is on his way, and you have less than 20 minutes to become a fancy waiter. So read this.
How to become a fancy waiter in less than 20 minutes. Don't worry, Squidward. I'll memorize every page, right down to the punctuation marks.
Squidward has pretty high hopes that he's got this covered, having filled all the positions needed. Unfortunately, though, his hope quickly diminishes when he witnesses Patrick physically assaulting the hat rack, and Mr. Krabs destroying the kitchen, having attempted to cook peas the, quote, old-fashioned way, just exploding the can by setting it directly on the gas burner.
Mr. Krabs, you gotta take him out of the... Holy fish paste! What is that?
That's the appetizer.
But I thought you said you were the head chef on the SS Gourmet.
Did I say that? No, I cleaned the bathrooms on the Gourmet. I was the head chef on the SS Diarrhea.
In a panic, Squidward goes searching for SpongeBob, but he's shocked to find him standing in a corner, completely out of it. His eyes are bloodshot, his teeth are ground to thin sticks, and his brain is trying to bulge out of his head from consuming so much information so quickly. He stands there, literally exploding as Squidward tries to talk him down, telling him that he needs to relax and instructing him to completely clear his mind of everything.
Everything that doesn't have to do with fine dining and breathing.
Just got an order from the boss. Dump everything that isn't about fine dining. Come on, come on, come on. Quicker, quicker. Delete, delete. Dump it, dump it, dump it. Hurry up. What do you think I'm paying you for? You don't pay me. We don't even exist. We're just a clever visual metaphor used to personify the abstract concept of thought. One more crack like that and you're out of here. No, please. I have 3 kids.
As the entire metaphorical office in SpongeBob's mind erupts into madness, in the real world, he stands there speechless and drooling, completely unable to respond to Squidward, who's erupted into a full-blown panic by this point. In his hysteria, Squidward runs outside, hoping to tell Squilliam that he needs a little bit more time before he shows up. However, as soon as he gets through the door, he sees Squilliam and his entourage have already arrived.
Squilliam, I've got to explain.
Explain what? That you, Squidward Tentacles, voted most likely to suck eggs in high school, are trying to pass off a lousy burger stand as a 5-star restaurant? Homina, 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 homina.
Just then, SpongeBob, looking his sharpest, comes bursting through the kitchen door, ready to seat Squilliam and his party, leaving Squidward absolutely dumbfounded. He single-handedly seats everybody and gives Squilliam the deluxe experience, complete with a hand feeding and a massage, as Squilliam sits there just euphoric from the experience.
Pinch me, I must be dreaming. Ow!
If you need anything else, just call.
SpongeBob, I can't thank you enough for all you're doing.
Fine dining and breathing are all I know how to do.
It worked. I can't believe it. Squilliam thinks I own a 5-star restaurant. Time to rub it in his face.
Squidward approaches Squilliam's table as he's in tears about just how fabulous the food and atmosphere at this restaurant is. Of course, Squidward takes this as a perfect gloating moment, making Squilliam praise him over the loudspeaker as he holds a #1 squid foam finger, reading from a card that Squidward himself wrote. Unfortunately for Squidward though, his gloating comes to a screeching halt when Squilliam tells him that the true star of the show is the brilliant waiter who's delivering this 5-star service.
It's as if all he knows is fine dining and breathing. I must know your name.
My name?
Yes, your name, son.
Beef Wellington?
No, your name.
The fork on the left?
Stop joking. Tell him your name.
At that, the office in SpongeBob's mind starts to erupt into a worse panic than before, with everyone scrambling to find the most basic info. As the inside of SpongeBob's brain catches fire, it snaps in half and he completely loses it, throwing water on Squilliam and running off like a barking dog. SpongeBob goes full-blown crazy, smashing people's faces into their food and doing all sorts of just wild things.
Would you like some cheese on that, sir?
Run for your lives, everyone! It's the appetizer!
As everybody evacuates the Krusty Krab in fear, Squidward just stands in the middle of the wreckage, watching it all fall apart before his very eyes. His suit rips itself off, and his Krusty Krab hat falls on his head from the sky, as his cashier name tag autonomously finds its way onto his shirt. Just then, Squilliam approaches him looking smug and waiting for him to try to explain his way out of this one. And at that, Squidward finally gives up the whole act. He sobs and weeps, admitting that he's a fraud who is only making a futile attempt at impressing Squilliam and that he's really just a cashier. Surprisingly though, Squilliam puts a tentacle on Squidward, saying that he understands and that he also has a confession to make.
I made everything up about my life. I have no yachts, jets, or anything. I was only trying to impress you. The horrible, sad truth is, I'm a cashier too.
Is that true?
Of course not. I'm filthy stinking rich. Come on, everyone. Let's all take a ride in my balloon/casino.
As everybody leaves, Squidward takes a seat, as defeated and miserable as ever, while Mr. Krabs yet again plays him a sad song on the world's smallest violin. And just like that, the episode comes to an end. So this episode, contrary to the last one, isn't a full embodiment or featuring a personification that's relatable. However, there are many aspects and morals to the story here that are relatable in multiple ways, and interestingly enough, that's strongly established right out the gate. Specifically in the fact that this episode begins with Squidward counting down the seconds until the end of his shift. That moment, without a shadow of a doubt, serves to set the mood of this episode just so perfectly from the get-go. As kids, we all saw this beginning scene, and I'm sure most of us simply gained the understanding that this episode is gonna revolve around Squidward and how miserable he is. Again, mainly due to not understanding how the workforce operates and having our only concern in life at the time being to get through school, which in and of itself is an entirely different flavor of difficulty when you're growing up, this just came across as Squidward being a downcast baby. All these years later though, seeing it as not only an adult but one that's worked in customer service for over a decade, one that's banked a cumulative hundreds of hours and counting the final seconds until my shift is over, this might just be the most relatable and true-to-life cold open to any episode of this series. Whether you've been there once or a million times over, we've all been in that exact position where you're counting down your seconds to freedom. It can be in the context of school, work, or any obligation in general. But in the context of Squidward, yeah, it hits extra hard for the burnt out retail workers out there. On that note, that brings us to Squidward's speech about how there'll come a day when he'll make something his life and he'll never have to step foot in this building again. Now, again, this is another one of those sentiments that literally every single one of us have felt at some point. That feeling of just being so fed up with your job that it's almost inspiring. It pushes you to want to do better and grow your skill set so you can move on to bigger and better things. It's a feeling that oftentimes can lead to a beautiful career metamorphosis. However, these are usually thoughts that most of us keep on the inside. Like, not to say you can't share your aspirations, of course, but the condescending energy that came along with these thoughts, the way Squidward delivered them, you know, the same kind that can have a tendency to come out when you're walking out of your miserable job at the end of the day. Yeah, that's the part that most of us usually try to keep inside. What's really interesting to consider, though, is the fact that as much as these situations in these episodes are hyperbolized, it almost feels like Squidward himself is the personification of the inside thoughts of every overworked, underpaid, miserable employee. Like, if you took the inner monologue of everybody who hates working in customer service but has nevertheless found themselves stuck in the rut of the service industry for decades, rolled them all into one and turned it into a cartoon character, the outcome would be Squidward without a doubt. As it pertained to SpongeBob, on the other hand, this episode highlighted a really interesting aspect of what he represents to us in the context that we're looking at him, because up to this point, he's always been the happy-go-lucky all-star employee who can handle anything that the job throws at him, even his boss being abusive. This one, though, shows him finally cracking and not being able to handle what's been put on his plate. It's not even one where he refuses to take it. He just simply can't process this much information that quickly. He can't take it. The most pure form of irony here, though, is the fact that Squidward has been openly wanting to see him crash out for a long time now. However, SpongeBob never really has until now. The time that Squidward desperately needs his skills. It's very symbolic of how in real life, there are a lot of times that whether you like it or not, you're going to end up depending on people that you don't like. Even simply in a coworkers trying to keep this ship afloat together context. On a bit of a different note though, Squidward demanding this of SpongeBob and the fact that he wasn't able to pull it off until he completely wiped his mind to a clean slate and built a foundation of fine dining is itself a huge satirical metaphor. It lies in the simple fact that SpongeBob ended up efficient at the job, but only at the sake of completely ditching his identity. As much as he represents the easily programmable, malleable, and compliant worker on a daily basis, this specific episode embodies how corporate systems want workers who just do the job with no personal baggage whatsoever. They expect people to leave their whole identity at the door because while they're on the clock, their identity is the workplace. Which of course isn't necessarily illegal, but I mean, you can't be surprised if some of your employees end up a little miserable as a result. Outside of that, one other thing I truly find value in acknowledging is the fact that once things were in SpongeBob's control and he got his act together, everything went really well for Squidward. The restaurant was beautiful, the food looked amazing, and the service was out of this world. All thanks to SpongeBob, Squidward was able to cover up his tracks and back up his lie. But of course, the moment that Squidward starts being a jerk and decided that it was time for him to take credit for all of SpongeBob's work, rubbing it in Squilliam's face, it all goes sideways into a ditch. To be honest, the symbolism here is ridiculously abundant on a few different levels. Like, this could be simply seen as a lesson in arrogance, taking credit for other people's work, lying, and that's all just kind of scratching the surface. However, likely the most relatable lesson that this episode portrayed is that in life, some lessons honestly just have to be learned the hard way. In the case of Squidward, it was lying, digging his heels in deeper, and failing to put on the act that backed up his lie, then taking credit for someone else successfully putting up that facade for him that ultimately led to a moment where he would learn his lesson the hard way. And sure, you might not be able to relate to that specific instance. However, we've all had to learn at least one lesson the hard way in our lives at one point or another. With that in mind, of course, I have to bring up the moment where Squidward is just kind of standing there watching the plot that SpongeBob worked so hard to build just fall to pieces. His entire made-up fantasy world just crumbles around him, and all he can do is stand there and take it in, watching it all unravel in real time, without a single thing to do but accept the sad reality. We've all been here. It might not be your own made-up fantasy restaurant, but we've all been in an instance where you feel so drained and helpless that literally all you can do is just stand there and watch the world burn around you. On a more obvious note, this episode also serves to wholeheartedly showcase the curse of comparison. Like, up to this point in the series, we've been well aware that Squidward's misery isn't strictly about his job. It's about his neighbors, his unrecognized artistic talent, and overall feeling like he doesn't fit in with society, seeing himself as better than the general public. However, this one showed us in a huge way that his misery goes back even as far as when he was in school, and at that, with that old misery resurfacing and colliding with his current misery, his entire life just kind of explodes. That's what really led to him telling the lie that got him into this entire mess in the first place. In all reality, this can be seen as a true-to-life representation of how we as people can be totally surviving and okay in our own lane, until we're reminded that someone else, especially someone we bear a bitter malice towards for the past, has more than us. It's that envy that reopens all of the truly human insecurities, and at the core of that for Squidward, all of this happening at the hands of someone who's just always been better than him really is just the catalyst that drives his life to this unnecessary full circle moment where that comparison ends up winning the war in his head, and he feels the need to lie to hide these feelings of inadequacy. He weaves this massive web of lies concerning who he is as a person and what he does, just to save face for a guy that has never had any respect for him, who honestly Squidward really shouldn't care much about. On a bigger note than just one-upping an old rival, this ties directly into modern social media culture. In the day and age of chasing the highest number of likes and the most followers, everybody curates their lives to make themselves seem so successful, and that their life is something that it really isn't. Just like how Squidward tried to curate a fake restaurant to impress Squilliam. Sure, we can recognize that in Squidward's case, the person he's trying to impress is actually someone he knows, and that it's more based on a personal grudge. But even then, that just solidifies the relatability and validity of the social media point even more. People put on this face chasing attention from people they don't even know and likely will never know just for attention and validation. Of course, it's one thing to put yourself out there artistically or put your thoughts and opinions out there, but when you're full-blown lying about who you are as a person and setting up scenes just right to curate events the way you want them to be seen, that's where this episode relates the most without a doubt, and that's something that we see a lot in modern society. In a very subtle and often overlooked way, it serves as a satirical commentary of modern social media and trends, which is genuinely interesting when you consider that this episode came out before social media as we know it in a modern sense. As far as Squilliam goes though, and him actually being successful, having the life that Squidward wishes he had, and being a massive tool about it, it's really just a huge testament to how sometimes all you can do is be the bigger person. Literally, sometimes that is your only option. The thing is, for people like Squilliam, they just do it in hopes of an elevated response. You can have someone like him mocking you and acting like they're better than you all they want. However, if you don't react and just kind of let it be water off the duck's back, remembering that high school bullies' opinions genuinely don't matter, oftentimes that serves to disarm people like that. It's not guaranteed, of course, but like lying about your entire life and trying to seem like something you aren't is without a doubt just gonna make things worse. However, once you not only realize that people like Squilliam do this to get a rise out of you, but you also use that to your advantage, all the power shifts to you. The power is literally in your hands as you rob them of the response that they're so desperate for, leaving them feeling unsatisfied and like they were a jerk for no payoff. If there were any final thing that we need to discuss about this episode before we move on to the next one, it would be the fact that this one took its time to portray those little tiny SpongeBobs inside of SpongeBob's brain and have them comprehend that they're just the personification of the abstract concept of thought. Now, looking at just the surface here, this gag is completely hilarious, especially considering that the same mini SpongeBob follows up recognizing his lack of existence by saying that he has kids. However, when we dig deep into the implications here and realize that this also comes with the understanding that this little guy is painfully aware of his existence, it's honestly almost kind of alarming. I mean, sure, it's a random gag that breaks the fourth wall in a silly way, but there's just something about this character acknowledging that he doesn't even exist that invokes an internalized, looming sense of existential dread. I mean, just as much as this little guy is lines and colors on a screen meant to be a visual metaphor for what happens in our brains, we ourselves are all just walking flesh bags full of bones and organs on a massive rock floating through space. The fact that a little random character like that can understand its true meaning for existence, but we as humans stumble and stress at the thought of our existence and the thought that we really only walk this earth for the blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things, it's honestly kind of a sensitive and terrifying subject when you think about it. But with that being said, it also serves as the perfect transition point. As with trying to understand the meaning in one's life, and trying to dismiss that existential dread by giving yourself purpose, oftentimes comes the pursuit of happiness and the inevitable feeling that the grass is always greener on the other side. A feeling that in and of itself can leave you stuck in a rut where you're constantly searching for the next thing to fill that mysterious void within yourself. There's no episode that shines a better light on that sentiment and explores it in a more creative but also spine-chilling way than the next episode that we're diving into. We're checking out the iconic Season 1 episode, SB-129.
SB-129.
This episode begins on an early Sunday morning in Bikini Bottom. As the sun is just starting to rise, Squidward is already up and at 'em, ready to practice his clarinet. He heads to his open window to play it where everybody can hear him, but right when he goes to blow into it, SpongeBob's alarm clock goes off.
Good morning, Squidward. Wanna go jellyfishing? Hooray! We'll be right over. Ready to go?
No, I'm not ready to go.
SpongeBob and Patrick keep pestering Squidward over and over again, no matter how many times he throws them out and slams the door in their faces. After a while, though, SpongeBob reminds him that the Krusty Krab is closed today, which gives Squidward the idea to sneak over there and hide out for the day.
Alone at last.
Squidward! Squidward!
In an attempt to hide from SpongeBob and Patrick, Squidward decides to seek refuge inside of the deep freezer, which thankfully works like a charm. They walk through the whole restaurant, not noticing him in there, and moments later, they leave, assuming that he's probably just beaten them to Jellyfish Fields. Squidward's victory, though, is short-lived when he realizes that he can't get out of the freezer.
Locked? Oh no. Oh, well, someone will realize I'm gone and come looking for me.
2,000 years later.
After a few seconds, we see what looks like a flying SpongeBob floating by with rockets instead of legs, surprised to see a frozen octopus lying on the ground. He pulls out a laser hammer and uses it to release Squidward from his frozen prison, and for a moment, he just lies there confused about what's happening. His savior introduces himself as Spongetron, welcoming Squidward to the future, where everything is chrome and the alphabet has 486 letters, to which Spongetron has clones of himself corresponding with every single one.
Thanks.
Squidward pleads with Spongetron and his clones, telling them that he doesn't belong here and that him ending up here was a huge mistake. He begs them to help him get back home, and at that, they happily point him in the direction of their time machine.
Down the hall to the left. Oops. Oh, yeah, that one's the can opener. Try the one on the right.
Squidward finds himself in a rather tiny yet liminal space that simply consists of a hanging light and a control knob that simply takes you to the future or the past. He assumes that SpongeBob likely doesn't exist in the past, and at that, he pulls the lever down, sending himself hurling through time and space at unimaginable speeds. As the time machine warps through the space-time continuum, it ultimately ends up making an explosive landing in prehistoric Bikini Bottom. Squidward steps off of it, curious yet cautious, noting an old-world charm with hopes that he can finally be alone here and maybe have some tranquility.
Maybe now I can finally be alone with my clarinet. Huh? What? Huh? Ah!
Squidward peers into the kelp and he's shocked to find none other than a prehistoric SpongeBob munching on some coral. The prehistoric sponge hops out of the bush, causing Squidward to panic, but it's not long before he realizes this sponge is seemingly harmless.
No thanks. Hi there.
Squidward ends up walking off and sitting by a rock to enjoy his clarinet, however he's yet again distracted, this time by the screams of SpongeBob and Patrick as they get a little too handsy with the jellyfish. Squidward runs up to them, heated at the fact that they're practically torturing themselves with a jellyfish, and he ends up whipping up a few jellyfishing nets for them to catch it with. Naturally, they fall in love with the idea of scurrying off to play with their new nets. Finally, having them occupied, Squidward sits down and hopes for a few moments of peace as he begins playing his clarinet. Unfortunately for him though, his piece erupts into full-blown chaos when prehistoric SpongeBob and Patrick hear his playing and just go absolutely bonkers, sprinting at him with a rage that could only be avoided by the sweet protection of the time machine. Squidward runs right into it, freaking out and immediately yanking on the lever, screaming that he wants out of here. As the lever breaks, the time machine ends up completely wigging out as it starts traveling back and back and back until, in merely the blink of an eye, Squidward ends up in what you could see as a time before the existence of anything. He looks around, dumbfounded to see nothing but an endless white void.
He's not here. No more SpongeBob. No more. I may finally have found a place where I can be all alone.
At that, the crushing weight of being completely alone starts to emotionally encumber Squidward as panic completely overwhelms him. He begins to run and run and run until he realizes that there's no way out of here. He's stuck, forever alone. In his panic and terror, he starts to jump and stomp repeatedly until eventually the surface he's standing on caves in and he finds himself mysteriously back in the time machine. He starts banging on the broken panel and screaming about how badly he wants to go back home and admitting that he misses Bikini Bottom, his house, and even SpongeBob. And at that, without even a touch of the panel or anything, Squidward miraculously teleports right back to his normal, present day, directly in front of his house.
Oh, I'm back. I can't believe this. I was in space, and I went to the future, and then I went to the past, and then I was nowhere, and you don't know how happy I am to see you guys.
Does this mean you want to go jellyfishing?
No! Who's the barnacle head who invented that game anyway?
You are, Squidward.
Go on back.
Now, I absolutely couldn't think of a better episode for us to end things on here. This one is chock full of relatable Squidward moments, lessons that ring true to real life, and a lot of easily overlooked points that made this one such a powerful tool to drive these sorts of points home. I do want to give a fair warning though. The analysis on this one gets genuinely dark. Like, I'm not talking surface level existential dread. We're going a lot deeper and more morbid than that, and I guess if you're sensitive, I'd recommend moving on to last week's video about Susie Carmichael if you haven't seen it yet. It's absolutely fantastic if I do say so myself. As far as this one goes though, of course at face value, one of the most obvious points is how this episode is reflective of the pursuit of a perfect life. Squidward gets to the point where he's accidentally hurled into the future, then instead of trying to get back to where he belongs when given the opportunity, he decides to take this as a chance to explore further in hopes of finding a point in time where SpongeBob doesn't exist. That pursuit of a point in time that brings him joy is without a doubt indicative of the saying that the grass is always greener on the other side. However, in this case, it gets a lot more morbid because ultimately, Squidward's grass, as far as we've seen in this show, has never really been green to begin with. In all reality, it seems that any patch of grass, no matter how green or dull it is more fruitful than the barren dirt patch that Squidward has. The relatability, though, isn't necessarily in the lesson that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. As adults, specifically in the constantly moving world that we're in nowadays, the true relatability lies in the fear of never finding your true happy place. Not being happy in the past, present, future, or even in your own custom-made perfect personal solitude. Whether it be the tough realization that sometimes in life we find ourselves chasing something unattainable, or that we're chasing something that simply doesn't exist. Even deeper than that though, and possibly more relatable on a chilling level, is how this episode showcases the worry of never being able to escape the things that bring you misery. Clearly, in Squidward's case, that would be SpongeBob and Patrick. No matter where he went, he just couldn't find a reasonable place to escape them. They were just kind of always there, until it was nobody there. Of course, we could see this as a representation of never finding your happy place as well, but even deeper cuts the fear of finding what seems like a happy place just to stumble upon some inevitable baggage that clouds happiness with misery and woe. Like leaving a toxic relationship or friendship just to stumble upon one that's equally or even more toxic. Or like moving from an expensive area to a cheaper area that you can actually afford, just for the prices in that area to move up and price you out as well. It's a big metaphor for those sad moments where the happiness that we're trying so hard to build is completely crushed by something that we approached with nothing but the most positive of intentions. Moving past the surface on this one, another huge theme here that's easily overlooked, yet genuinely human to its core, comes in the moment where Squidward ends up frozen in the Krusty Krab for 2,000 years, without anyone noticing that he's there or going looking for him. We could go on and on about the improbability of this or the implications behind it, but the true and shocking relatability here comes in the simple fact that this is genuinely a very solid portrayal of the fear of being left behind. The deep human terror that comes along with the worry that you could genuinely end up stuck somewhere that you can't survive, and that no one ever notices that you're there. Whether that be the fear of accidentally being locked in the walk-in freezer at work, or the irrational fear of being buried alive, it's a very real one that a lot of us share in. But the thing is, as much as being left behind is terrifying, an even more chilling aspect of this episode is how much it encapsulates the endless fear of ending up alone. Ending up with nothing and no one. That right there is almost more terrifyingly real than the fear of being left behind, because in a sense, whereas some can move on in stride and build their own happiness, finding joy in solitude, others end up living their final days completely alone and sad, almost feeling left behind in their own home. An interesting aspect to consider is how that sentiment pertains to the sequence with Squidward in the endless white void. This right here takes that rational human fear and twists it into a mix with irrational fears. What this void in the entire sequence here represents isn't just the endless fear of ending up alone. It's not just the existential dread and whatnot. It's being alone in a foreign, otherworldly place where you seem to be the one and only thing that exists. It triggers that deep inside your brain dreamlike fear that comes out from playing video games in the vein of Liminal Core or Pools. It's like an irrational fear that's almost on an inner primal level. It's the kind of thing that invokes fear just based on the atmosphere alone. It doesn't need gore, jump scares, or a monster. It's just pure psychological chaos in the most calm way that torments you mentally. It brings out a very deep-rooted human fear that, like, in a really weird way, a mind-blowing amount of people can relate to. I mean, you can't be placed in a dimension that you aren't familiar with, where there's just endless nothingness and you're the only thing in existence, and not feel a deep sense of terror, right? It's extremely impressive when you consider that kind of void terror stems from literal nothingness, and this episode ends up putting that center stage in its most eerie form. Without a doubt, the experience in general may not be relatable, but the idea behind it does end up haunting each viewer in a very similarly human way. One other really compelling aspect to take in about this one is the fact that in the end, absolutely nothing is explained. We don't know how the time machine got back to the right time, or even have the slightest inkling of why that happened. We just know that Squidward is back where he wanted and needed to be, and everything is okay now. The thing is, though, this is actually symbolic of a few things when you peel back the layers. First of all, it's a huge reminder that a lot of times in life, things just tend to line up the way that they do and happen the way that they do for a reason. A reason that potentially could be beyond your understanding. In those moments where things just line up too perfectly for it not to be questioned, we're left wondering, could this be a higher power at play here? Are the people running the simulation here finally giving me a bit of a leg up? On top of that though, it's also a massive testament to the fact that sometimes in life, there is no explanation. Or at least, if there is, it's not one that you have access to, are entitled to, or possibly could even fathom. This one is a very oddball reminder that sometimes things are meant to be vague. There are times when you just simply aren't going to be able to explain why things turned out how they did, and you just kind of have to accept it and move on. Despite the lack of an explanation in the ending though, in hindsight, it's truly fascinating to take in the fact that throughout the entire journey of all these episodes that we've checked out, it was shown that Squidward has nothing but resentment towards SpongeBob and Patrick. He sees them as annoying neighbors and SpongeBob as his annoying coworker, and that's about it. However, in this episode, we see front and center that it took Squidward being forced into a really messed up and terrifying situation for him to finally realize that he's even slightly thankful for their existence, and that he really does appreciate them. Now, this right here is very much akin to how in real life, going through true hardships or even something severely traumatic can give us a newfound appreciation for those around us that we may have had very little grace toward previously. Honestly, there's no shame in it, as that's a very human trait. As humans, we're not built to be 100% perfect 100% of the time. Sometimes we're going to have certain feelings toward constant people in our lives for certain reasons that honestly might be petty or trivial. But when you go through something that genuinely elicits that true fear for your life, it's okay to admit that you actually are pretty thankful for those that you've had a tendency to take for granted. Changing after a very life-altering experience is a natural thing to go through, and a lot of people end up implementing positive changes in those cases. We've all had situations like this, and honestly, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily take something messed up or life-threatening happening to make you appreciate the things around you that you sometimes take for granted. But you have to admit, terrifying experiences like the one that Squidward went through absolutely have a tendency to make people see the bright side of what life has to offer rather abruptly. Now, kind of winding down towards the end here, I have a few final points as it pertains to this episode that are certainly relatable, but I reserved them specifically for the true Dust Till Dawn fans that actually make it all the way to the end of the videos. I appreciate you guys so much. So, one interesting thing that I find relatable to human nature in general in this episode is the way that Squidward sits down to play his clarinet, just enjoying his own music and being his own biggest fan. Meanwhile, prehistoric SpongeBob and Patrick are just overtly offended by it and see this sound as something that needs to be destroyed immediately. Of course, one way we could see this is a fantastic representation of the real-life truth that one man's trash is another man's treasure. In life, sometimes you're gonna get hate for enjoying something that you like because others just don't get it. Especially in the day and age of the internet. With that being said, it's okay for people to like things that they like. Outside of that though, it's also a good example of unrecognized talent. Now, you're probably thinking, Sean, Squidward is really bad at the clarinet. What are you talking about? But hear me out, okay? Sure, Squidward's playing isn't that great as a solo performance. Dare I say terrible. But like in a different context, add some blast beats and some crazy guitar, Squidward could make an excellent clarinet player in a wacky grindcore band. Okay, never mind. I'm not sure that point landed as good as I wanted it to. But if there's anything else we need to discuss, it would be the opening sequence where Squidward opens his window at the crack of dawn and starts playing the clarinet with the intention of everybody outside hearing it. Now, this, of course, is likely something that most of us haven't ever done ourselves in a literal sense. However, it's one of those where you look at the big picture and I don't know about you, but my first thought is, who does this? Who would go out of their way to open their window first thing in the morning and intentionally blast their terrible music hoping for the entire city to hear it? This is one of those things where if Squidward wasn't so pretentious, I feel like at some point he'd look back at this in hindsight just so embarrassed, wondering why he chose to do that. With that being said, this entire act, even though it's one we can't relate to having directly done ourselves, ends up being so relatable because we've all done things in the past that keep us up at night while we reflect on how dumb of a decision we made or how embarrassing of a moment we ended up having. Having been in that position yourself at some point, you see Squidward doing this and in the moment, you can't help but feel the secondhand cringe on his behalf, recognizing this as a moment that will likely be looked on with a massive facepalm and some middle of the night sweat. For me personally, and God, I can't believe I'm telling this story, I relate this to a time when I was about 5 years old and my dad, rest his soul, took me to the grocery store. We were going to the deli counter, and the way that the store was set up, right in front of the deli, they had like a little tiny shelf with some loaves of bread. Little Sean was apparently tired from walking and decided that he needed a break, thinking it was a good idea to take a seat on top of these loaves of bread like they were his own personal bench. And like, sure, they were cheap off-brand white bread loaves, not some like artisan expensive sourdough or anything like that, but still, that's completely beside the point. The deli employee was face-palming, my dad was face-palming and so embarrassed, and I just had no idea that I was actively doing something completely brainless. Yeah, that's what I lay awake thinking about at night. It's one of those where you look back at your actions like, who does that? And you just can't help but feeling the crushing realization of being a self-aware human who has to reflect on past stupid actions at the most inconvenient times. With that being said though, hey, if you have a funny, embarrassing moment that you're brave enough to share, drop it down in the comments. I promise, laughing about it and sharing the laugh lessens the crippling blow. Kinda. I guess with all of that in mind though, it's really crazy to realize that we all genuinely resonate with Squidward as adults far more than we resonate with SpongeBob. Though SpongeBob is the main character, he stands for chaos. He's hyper and always on one. Meanwhile, Squidward is just a normal person. He serves to fill the place of the average, everyday human experience, just trying to exist in a world where nobody else gets that you're just trying to get by. In a way, that's genuinely what makes him the most relatable character. He embodies the perfect vessel for this show to teach its viewers a very human lesson, or at least open the door for the viewer to relate in a more everyday life sort of way. And, well, best of all, he's an absolute hilarious savage. Despite the negative tone and constant downer energy, the fact that he's just such a good ball buster ultimately sets him up to be a character that we can all enjoy in even a comedic aspect. Which, that aspect alone, well, it's a little nice that it lessens the blow of how much he reminds us of the crippling pain of real life. But I have to ask, what do you guys think? Did you grow up to become Squidward? Ha! Psych, I already know you did, you nihilistic little savage, you! Regardless though, let me know what you think down in the comments. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, I have to give a massive shout out to my patrons of the true 90s Kids tier and the YouTube members as well. Thank you all so much for your support, and I hope that you know I appreciate you more than pizza. And pizza is my absolute favorite food, so that says a lot. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and give a little praise to the new algorithm in hopes that it pushes this video to everybody else. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Peace.